Hello and welcome to the D365 Insights podcast brought to you by Source and Connect. Today is episode 5, which is all around master requirement planning in D365 from forecast to finished goods. Today we are welcoming a very special guest, Monica Moanganga. Monica and I have known each other for many years. I've placed Monica on a couple of projects that I've been working on. And Monica is what we call in recruitment a bit of a unicorn. She is a qualified accountant, so she can act as a finance consultant, has a lot of experience in supply chain, manufacturing, production, also retail, experience across both BC and F&O, and can act as a solution architect as well. So welcome, Monica, to the show. I'm really, really pleased to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. It's nice finally to be in your podcast.
Absolutely. So let's start right at the beginning, Monica. For anyone who's new to the concept, what exactly is MRP or Master Requirement Planning?
So basically, master planning is, or MRP, as you said, the other words, it's pretty much a system that is designed to plan manufacturing production. It enables that production request to pretty much identify the materials, the estimate quantities, where materials are required to meet the production schedules, and manages their delivery timing. So it looks at the raw materials capacities currently available. It looks at the capacity required to complete that production and determines what manufacturing production can be done. And what it does at the end, it just populates a production order or a transfer order, and also it looks into safety stock as well. So it kind of looks at the whole picture where you can produce using your constraints of what the materials you've got, but also create the safety stock so you don't run out of stock. And at the same time, if you don't have resources, it balances out if you even need to source out resources outside your organization.
Amazing. So can you explain how D365 figures out what materials and capacity are available and what's still needed to complete production?
So what D365 does, it pretty much incorporates a number of source of data that is sitting on D365. So it looks at the current sales orders that have been raised, obviously, because most of the time it starts from the sales order that come in. It looks at the quotations that are there. It looks at the demand forecast, because you can also opt to actually look at that. And then it looks at the inventory levels. So the information that it gets is pretty much a kind of like a larger scale of the inventory that you currently have, looking even into things like the production or the purchase order. What's the lead time when you order something for you to be able to get into the warehouse in order to be able to do the manufacturing? So it looks at minimax things, for example. So what's the minimum that every time, even when you've got your stock level and you're producing, what do you have to keep as your minimum and what's the maximum that you can produce? And it looks at things like decoupling points as well. So at what time that you have to trigger the buffer stock. So it pretty much it's very much depending on data. So it's driven pretty much on the data that you currently have, and the data is pretty much, as I said, is a combination of the sales data, warehouse data, and demand and forecast data.
Okay, great. And so once D365 has run master planning, what kind of planned orders can it generate to help meet demand?
So it produces a number of orders. So it can produce, obviously, it generates your planned order, which is pretty much this is what we need to produce in order for us to get to do that production. But it can also produce your planned purchase orders. So things that, for example, you've already decided from the beginning that you're probably always going to purchase. You're never going to stock these items. So every time a production order is created, then it triggers a purchase order that will go to the vendors that we need to buy that material, because this is the material that is always been requested at the time when there's a production is set. But also, it also produces things like, for example, if you don't have enough resources labor-wise, so you can produce purchase order to contractors or to agency, so you can send more staff members to actually build that. But even for the items that you can produce in-house, it looks at things like, for example, if we don't have enough capacity or the order is quite large, it can even split that to the way that you can actually order outside so that you don't lose that time for the delivery of the items. And also it can produce planned transfer orders. So an example where it looks at, yes, we don't have that item here in stock, but we have it in another warehouse. So then it can produce a planned transfer order to bring the item from another warehouse to our warehouse. Or we don't produce at all because we do have it in stock. Yes, we've ordered here in Manchester, but we have it in stock, say in Birmingham. So it can just produce a purchase order, a planned order, planned transfer order to say, can you bring the item from Birmingham into Manchester so we can ship out?
Excellent. So now D365 offers a few different types of planning processes. Could you walk us through the three main ones and what they're used for?
So yes, we've got three types. So we've got the master planning, which calculates your net requirements based on your actual orders and enables the company to control the raw material and the capacity replenishment on a short term. This is normally a day-to-day basis. And then we got the forecast planning. And the forecast planning is pretty much calculates your gross requirements based on future projections or forecasts. And this enables you to do more long-term planning of raw materials and capacity. And the third one is intercompany master planning. And what intercompany master planning is pretty much a calculate. It's kind of the first one that I mentioned, master planning, only what this one, it looks across all the legal entities. So it calculates your net requirement across all legal entities. It connects your demand and supply between your companies, which is most of the companies are using D365. They've got more than one legal entity. And not only that, it shows the short-term planning, but it also firms your order, and you can pretty much have a full picture of the organization, how much do we need to produce. Because if, say, you have it in another legal entity, you probably may not need pretty much to produce. You can do that transfer planned order, which I was talking about previously.
Great. So what are some of the key differences between master planning and forecast planning?
So master planning is pretty much calculates the net requirements. The focus on there is pretty much actual current orders. That's master planning. It's looking at what do we have, what orders have we got at the moment. So it focuses pretty much on the sales orders. And what the other one, the focus planning, it pretty much looks at the focus. So pretty much what we got enables the company pretty much to control the capacity in a longer term as well. So it's more about the focus rather than the actual. So it's based on our focus demand, focus supply, and that's pretty much the main difference. But also, as I mentioned before, that obviously the master planning has got that added advantage where pretty much it's a day-to-day, so which most of the company use that at the moment.
Brilliant. And so how does intercompany master planning work when you're dealing with multiple legal entities?
So how it works is it connects the demand and supply between companies. So on D365 master planning and module, pretty much you can upload your demand forecast and your supply forecast per legal entity, or you can actually pretty much upload once, and then obviously on the column you can specify which legal entity it's for. So what it does, the master plan, intercompany master planning, it does pretty much populate that net requirements, but only that this time it just looks across board, not just the legal entity that you've actually run your master planning.
Great. So let's talk a bit about procurement and sourcing. How does this module support the planning and production of goods in D365?
So it came about because implementing master planning, there's challenges for many manufacturers, which they require accurate data, focusing skills, deep understanding of the production process. So what the module that came about is pretty much with the procurement is being able to determine the inventory requirements. The procurement process begins and at the time when I run my master planning, and then I the moment I have a purchase order that has actually been triggered there, that I need to create a purchase order. So as I said before, there could be that the purchase order, yes, it could be that we're actually producing ourselves a part of it, or we need to order some of the things. So if I don't have the production procurement and module that doesn't work with master planning, it's pretty much we're stuck there. So the module had to work. So you can actually come from your master planning and navigate all the way to the procurement. Obviously, because now you're going to procurement, it goes all out because you will look at the vendors for that item that you need to order, whoever's been set up against that vendor. You'll be able to look at the lead time that we have against that vendor and the catalog as well, because if this is item that we're buying from time to time, so it kind of moves now from the production flow to now looking at the procurement team. What do they normally store, or data they have against the vendor or the supplier? Everything, prices, lead times, as I said, replacement, and pretty much it just goes against the other. So it's made it easier for the procurement team to know what exactly production team need at every single day. So it's kind of expanded that working between the teams.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. So once master planning runs, how does it drive procurement decisions, for example, generating purchase orders or flagging lead times?
So it will list pretty much the purchase order that are needed to complete the production. And most of the time it will list based on which one is needed first, because sometimes you need to purchase an item to be able to you need to make an item, you need to produce something in order to actually be able to complete another set of production. So that item first, you produce it, and then it becomes your inventory. And then that item now needs to complete the second inventory. And that's very typical for manufacturers. For example, things like car assembly. That's normally a common thing where they're producing an item first, and then that item becomes an inventory, and then it goes into production again. It becomes your stock and then produce again. So it pretty much populates your purchase orders in terms of which one needs to come first.
Yeah, fantastic. So how well can D365 help companies manage supplier relationships and make sure they're sourcing the right things at the right time?
So D365 introduced a vendor collaboration, which pretty much it's a portal. And I always encourage pretty much most places I've been into implementation, I encourage the vendor collaboration portal, because what it does, it pretty much allows your vendor to be able to log into D365 on their portal, and then they can update their catalog, price list, get any changes, any offers they've got against the items, even stock levels as well. So that makes it much easier if we go back to the previous question, when the purchase order is created, we are created against the item that is actually on stock, because we don't have to someone doesn't have to pick up a call and say, have you actually got this in stock, or what's the lead time for this one, especially if the vendor is ordering that abroad, because the vendor has already produced that on the vendor collaboration portal. So every single time our price list, our price catalog of the items we're ordering is up to date. And that vendor collaboration extend that, because it can actually even shows if the vendor has actually accepted the PO, or the vendor has actually rejected the purchase order because they've got a bit of a problem at the moment. Their supply chain has got a problem, so they're never going to get these items on time based on the date that you've got on a purchase order when you require the item. And it goes as far as even invoices as well. So they can even produce and upload the invoices on the portal. And same as us, when we pay, we can actually add the remittance on there. So it takes away a little bit of a delay of emails and communication between the supplier and the company.
Amazing, and saving lots of time.
Absolutely.
So let's shift to the production side now. Can you explain what the production life cycle looks like in D365?
So production life cycle in D365 is pretty much the production of an item, the process of producing an item. Now, we've mentioned before about the sales order, and pretty much majority starts there. So it starts pretty much a salesperson, a sales manager receives a sales order, and the sales order has got the item that they need and the delivery time that they expected. Then obviously the sales team will look, have we got this item in stock? If they've got item in stock, then it ends up there. They'll set up a dispatch note will come out and everything is finished. So that never touches us on the production control, the production circle. If we don't have the item in stock, or probably we have half, we kind of have some of them in stock, or we don't have the others. So then that kicks into, now we need to produce more. So that now goes into the planner. And then obviously the planning manager is, most of the companies, it's normally the planner who does the master planning part of the job. So the planner now would now go into the, okay, create a plan, create the master planning, which can create, as I said before, create a purchase order, or it can create a transfer order, or it can pretty much create just, these are the orders that we need to produce, which is the production orders. And then they can firm the orders. Firming is pretty much like confirming that actually, yes, we're actually moving and this can actually start into production. And also they can update things like we've mentioned before, lead times, which normally cover in an area we're calling item coverage, which takes a little bit of a consideration, everything, lead time, minimax, which I mentioned before, buffer stock, so to make sure that we maintain that. And then that now can now go into production. Now, when it goes into production, obviously, as we mentioned before, we got purchase orders. So now that circle not only just stays in the production flow, as we talked about, we're now touching the production procurement team, because a purchase order is now created. That means the purchase manager now receives the alert from the master planning that, or in production, they need this item. Then they can actually make the calls to the vendor and negotiate, when is the lead time? When are you going to get that in time? Can you get it tomorrow? But again, we mentioned before, if you go to the vendor collaboration portal, then that probably they'll just know exactly when they're going to get the item. Then they can firm their purchase orders. Okay, so, and if it's something that needs a subcontractor, then they will negotiate with the agency that's producing, sending that person. Then after that, it goes into the receiving, okay, which is now touching a bit of warehouse. So because the item will come in, the item that we've ordered on the purchase order, they're now being delivered, or the item that were part of the transfer order, they're now coming into the warehouse. So when they come into the warehouse, so they're coming into the receiving warehouse here. So the receiving warehouse will receive the raw materials and the components that are needed for production, for the bill of material. They'll do the picking and put away of the items that are needed to the right warehouse, because obviously they come into the receiving warehouse, but probably they need to move it to the production floor. So that will be done. And then that will now go through the warehouse, portions, as I mentioned, that it could start from the warehouse, receiving warehouse, into the, raw material warehouse, production floor, all the way to end of the production. Then after that, then this now becomes more a production manager task. So the production manager now will approve the estimate of the production, will firm the production now, because now they've got the items. Okay, they've received the items, they know what they need to produce. Now they can start the production. They can do the scheduling of the production. There's a bit of steps involved there. There's finance team that want to see how much resources took part in producing that item, so the actual numbers. And they'll release obviously the production order. They'll monitor the production and how it's going, and they'll pretty much do the execution of the manufacturing. When that's done, then now it goes into obviously the finished warehouse, where there could be some controls as well, quality control. So it needs to be done to make sure we produce, there's no fault to this item. And then after that, then it can be moved to the shipping warehouse. So now it's ready to go out. And then obviously the shipping people will arrange the logistics team to get the item shipped. And that's the end of the item. It's finally out. So it has a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, you'd never imagine the process that something goes through, and I know it differs per whatever it is that you're ordering, but you would never think when you order something online, for example, that it would go through such a process to then be shipped
Yes.
out to you. So
Especially
that's really good insight.
exactly, especially like to give an example, when you order the sofa from DFS, And
Yeah.
it's so easy to click and you say 5 weeks. So those are that stuff we were talking about. That's why it is a 5 weeks behind, because
Yeah.
it goes through all these people, to make
Yeah.
sure, the whole thing is actually done. Yeah. But
Yeah.
we
And
normally
we're
want
sat
it
here
tomorrow.
complaining. Oh, like 5 weeks. Um, so moving on to the next question, what's the difference between a production order, a batch order, and a Kanban, and when might you use each of those?
Yeah, so production order is the one that we've been talking about throughout. So production order pretty much gets populated at the time when I'm doing my MRP. Then the production order just populates it. As I said, you could either have a production or transfer order or a purchase order. And the batch order, it's pretty much so you can trigger the batch order directly on D365. So you're actually not running it from the master planning. There's a kind of a different places where you can run uh, pretty much to start the production. And the batch order, so it isn't much of a difference. It's just the way we're actually starting the process. And the Kanban is pretty much slightly more. So what Kanban it does is it's a scheduling board pretty much. You find when we go to factories, they actually have a Kanban on a whiteboard. So it's pretty much lets the production planner control and optimize the production plan for their jobs. So it pretty much gives a transparency of what's actually happening. Pretty much what I was talking about before, but you're actually having it in a board. Obviously, on D365, you can actually have the similar process. But basically, it just explains how the schedule works and describes the types of the Kanban. There is actually a number of uh, rules in Kanban itself. So I guess we I don't want to go so much into detail about Kanban because we could talk about it forever. But yeah, that's pretty much, yeah, that's a nutshell. I think that's a nutshell I can explain rather than going to more details.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Thank you. So we hear a lot about bombs and formulas in manufacturing. Could you explain what they are and how they are used?
Yes, so in process manufacturing, that's where you're pretty much going to hear a lot of BOM and formulas. And what basically they are, they just specify the required materials and or ingredients for a specific product to be produced. So whenever you have an item, as we gave our example for DFS, the sofa. So somebody would have already done their work behind, what do they need, how much materials of clothing, the fabric that they need to produce that particular sofa, how much wood, how many nails they're needed to produce that. So those items, they are forming part of a BOM. It's a bill of material. So it's pretty much all the ingredients or all the materials that are needed to make a production of one item. So pretty much most of the BOM is based on what do you need in order to produce the item.
Hmm.
With the formula is more specific. It goes a little bit further because this formula can actually even specify things like core products and byproducts. So you find that formulas are pretty much used a lot on a food manufacturer because, for example, you can start, you're producing, for example, milk, and then at the end of that, you got some extra milk that you could actually end up producing, butter. You can end up producing whey powder or baby milk powder. And the end of it, the residue of the water can end up producing even a fertilizer. So
Wow. Okay.
those are the core products and byproducts. So some of them are actually products, things that will produce itself regardless. Every time you produce, you're going to have this is going to happen. If you make orange juice, you're always going to have the outside of the orange juice. So what do I do that? Do I make marmalade for it? So
Yeah.
that's kind of the difference. So
Okay.
um, basically, and how the difference. So I see normally a formula is kind of like a subtype of the BOM
Hmm.
because it pretty much, I think the difference is that the fact that you can actually, it explains the extra bits, which is called product and byproduct. So if you don't, what I've found in a typical example, most of the time when it's an assembly plant or a car manufacturer or parts or a sofa example, then typical example, they will use a BOM. And when it's a food manufacturer, typical example, they're going to use a formula.
Mhm.
And again, there's more attached to the formulas and the BOMs rather than just materials. There's extra stuff like, the resources that are needed to be able to produce the item. And it goes to the level of, adding, the roots as well, which probably we're going to talk about it that's later today.
Great. And so how does D365 calculate estimated costs using things like bombs, routes, operations, and resources?
So, how to calculate the estimate of the cost of a product? It's a combination, as it was mentioned. So you need a BOM. So you need to know the materials that you need. Then you need a route, which now the route is pretty much defines, the steps pretty much of each of those items, what they actually go through. And then you need the operations of producing the item, and you need the resources against that operation. So the resources here, now we're talking about the people. So on the BOM, you're going to have your materials. You're going to have, you're going to say you need probably 12 hours to produce that item. On the route is just going to talk about, okay, what do you start the first bit? You pick up the item from the warehouse based on our initial example, the incoming warehouse or the material, and then you take it to the floor. So that's one, item that's, one of the processes already there. And then what's the next process? And then all the way up to where it's finished item. And then the resources that are needed to support each of those. So from forklifting, from lifting the items from the floor to the other warehouse, to the somebody who's running the machine, the production machine. So when you combine all of those together, that's when we get the estimate cost of production. And D365 have got a very good way of following that up. So it produces a costing sheet. And basically the costing sheet shows the estimate. And at the time when you finish the production, it actually gives you the actual.
Mhm.
So because now when you finish, because it will start with the estimate, this is the estimate based on the BOM and based on the item that I think based on the item that we're producing. But along the way, when people are clocking in and clocking out and marking what has been produced, then because some of the items probably have dropped or the hours they've used is slightly less. So then it just now calculates in the kind of like a two layers where one is an estimate and then the other layer that it's picking up is the actual. So when you finish, you actually get your finished costing sheet, which is going to your P&L.
Brilliant. Thank you. So can you share a real world example where D365 master planning really made a difference for a company?
Yes. So one of the projects that I was involved in is an assembly plant. And they're pretty much, so they're ordering parts, obviously, from different parts of the world. So D365, that maintaining the data of the vendor and being able to, the lead time. So everything they had to rely pretty much on D365 on that, and the BOM complexity for them, especially because one product can have different versions. So you
Mhm.
could produce one. So they had one product, but that same product can come in different colors, different sizes. So all of those are different BOM. As we mentioned the BOM before, those are BOM versions because they, when someone is ordering, as we mentioned before, you're ordering a sofa to DFS, you're choosing your yellow sofa, this size to that size. But that means the BOM for producing that is different to someone who ordered a two-seater to a three-seater sofa because there's more materials needed. So that, I think that is a place where I've seen it's a very small company in terms of people, but the orders and the business is quite big, and purely because D365 is pretty much doing everything for them. So from the order all the way up to transportation. So when the finished goods happen, they've allowed D365 to trigger the transportation ordering DPD to come and collect and drop to the shipper. So they've made the full use of that.
Amazing.
I've also seen a food manufacturer that have got real time sales. So their real-time sales is pretty much, they've got a lot of shops and going around. They've got their sales guys going around in town in shops and being able to replenish the quantity. But as that is happening on the sales app, as the sales guy is actually punching in the orders that they've received today, say 20 boxes here, 100 boxes there, it sends back to D365 the inventory level as real time. So then that triggers the batch that is running their production order. So the MRP knows, okay, yes, we need to produce more of this particular food in this flavor today, or we don't need to do that. So they actually relied as well. I've seen the way it's actually real life is just relying on D365 to be able to control what do we need tomorrow to be able to be in stock tomorrow for it, be able to actually ship out.
So clever. So what are some of the most common mistakes that new users make when they start working with master planning in D365?
So the biggest mistake is data. So getting the data right. So if you don't get the data right, so pretty much that master planning we're talking about real time and being able to depend on it, you're not going to get the accurate information. So if someone is not changing, so I can produce here as much as possible on the master planning and being able to do production. But if in the warehouse inventory, nobody's maintaining what has actually gone out or what is damaged or what has been returned, then I'm picking up the wrong data here when I'm looking at my master planning, because I'm thinking, oh yeah, I do have stock, but I actually don't. Or I have stock because nobody in the warehouse has actually triggered that they've actually shipped out. So if there's a delay anywhere of probably we're shipping out in the morning, but we don't actually update until the evening, but then the production is happening the whole day. So there's a bit of a sequence that is not working together there. So there's a real time issue that we need. Normally the people have to work together. Obviously, there's some things which are challenging, which like supply chain problems, which obviously that's globally, it's beyond the company, but hence why that vendor collaboration is kind of it's not 100% solution, but it kind of helps in order to work on there. And I think another one is inadequate quality control. So if you don't, you can have a really good D365 and is producing a good MRP and you're good in the warehouse management, but if the quality control module functionality is built in, and especially now with the competition, if you don't actually utilize that, it's easily that you can actually just get one bad feedback and the orders stop. So that's another point where I feel like the functionality is there, just push it and just press the button and use it.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, if someone's looking to improve their setup or get better results from master planning, what is your top tip?
So if they're looking at improving, so we're talking about an example here of someone who's already using D365, but they just want to improve. I would say it depends how long. Obviously, it's always key about how long, where they've started. So I've actually been in a workshop this year where master planning was already used, but there was a delay between when was the last time things were updated. So, which is data again, back to data. So there was two things. I think first is to check how old is the data cleansing. And then secondly, there's a lot of features that come up every single time. So we've had features that have come up, things like catch weight that came up. We had another feature, which is DDMRP, demand-driven MRP, where sometimes you may be using MRP for a long time, but probably the demand-driven MRP is the right one for you now. So I think it's also good for companies just to watch out on the features. I think I was in a project 3 years ago, and the best advice I've ever had from a solution architect was she told me, you just need to check the features, Monica, every week. You'll be amazed how much a lot of things that you're not doing, but the features is now been released and it's now very easy to do it. It's actually right there. So I'll say keep an eye on the features and constant data cleansing and updating.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, that's a wrap for today's episode. Monica, thank you so much for coming on and being a part of it. It's been very, very insightful. I think if there are any manufacturing businesses or supply chain companies who are either thinking of Dynamics as an implementation or are currently in an implementation, then this is definitely one for them to listen to. Um, so to everybody that's listening, thank you, and do think to subscribe. We are showing on YouTube, Spotify, and you can also follow us on LinkedIn. So thank you again, Monica,
Thank you.
and no worries, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.